Pokemon games have a variety of different error screens shown in the worst case scenario when your save file gets corrupted and becomes unusable. These screens are nearly impossible to encounter normally, but are all totally unique screens you'd likely never see. So today, we'll be breaking all the Pokemon games and exploring all the unique error screens in the series history. Starting from the very beginning, we have Gen 1. If you open the game with a broken save file, they just tell you the save was destroyed. If you saw this randomly upon opening your game, you'd probably be frightened and confused, as it's not entirely clear what's going on, but this is what you see here. And Gen 2, you don't get the bad news until you open your file on the file select, where they now actually tell you the save file was corrupted, which is a little better than what they had before. Gen 3 mixes things up and has a lot to talk about. It starts things off weird with the return of unclear messaging. It tells you your save file was deleted entirely out of the blue. Later entries in Gen 3 fix this and make the text more clear. However, this is not the only instance of errors you can encounter in these games. There is the obvious and well-known battery dry error, as well as this weird error you can only encounter on emulators, where the game tells you it's missing the chip needed to hold save files. Something else unique about Gen 3 is that it introduces a brand new feature, backup saves. In Gen 3, every copy of the game actually holds 2 save files, so every kid who grew up wishing they could have multiple saves, well, it turns out you did, just not a very unique selection of save files. How it works is that every time you save, the game makes a copy of your old save and stores that in the extra save slot, and then saves for real to the main save slot. This gives you an emergency backup save file if your cartridge falls out during saving or your Game Boy dies or something. This also means the weird text from earlier when your save is corrupted is nearly impossible to actually encounter, as you would need both of your save files to be broken to encounter the text. When the game does have to rely on that backup save file, by the way, it'll give you another unique screen that looks like this to restore the save file. Gen 3 also has one more very important and very rare text to talk about. The games also have rare menu text you'll get if your game somehow can't save during gameplay. Gen 3 in that regard stands out pretty well, because if your game can't save, it takes you to an entirely separate scene. This screen is used when the game fails to save and is trying it over a second time. It's supposed to look a little more ordinary, but in the original 1.0 release of Ruby and Sapphire, the screen is bugged and visually messed up. After the game is done trying to save again here, if it fails, the game will tell you there's nothing more it can do, and try to blame the battery, which, as we all know, has nothing to do with saving since everyone's battery is dead, and hell hasn't broken loose for Gen 3 fans since then. To top it all off, the game will then reset and take you to the title screen in Ruby and Sapphire, meaning if you're playing the game and trying to get by without saving, you've now lost your playthrough entirely. Later releases of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald fix the visual errors in the screen, while Fire Red and Leaf Greens looks completely different with a stark blue screen. The games still blame the battery if the save attempt fails on all versions, but the developers did spend some time solving whatever issue led to the game seemingly crashing in Ruby and Sapphire and requiring a reboot. And now, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, a failed save sends you back to the game normally. If somehow this emergency save attempt does succeed, by the way, then you get this text, and you still get sent to the title screen in Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, strangely enough. This entire situation is really weird. The fact that the games can't handle a save failure and have to reboot in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, the fact that the text is entirely corrupted in the original release, and also the English translators not understanding what's happening and blaming it on the battery for some reason. It's a ridiculous combination of things, and it's all nearly impossible to see firsthand, as you would have to have saved your cartridge a ridiculous amount of times to wear out the save chip to encounter this screen. For a bit of background, starting in Gen 3, saves are handled by a chip that can be worn down the more you save, compared to earlier games that used a replaceable battery. This is maybe why they made this screen in the first place, but everything around it is so crazy, and it's so rare to see anyway since the chips last for so long. Console games. These can break too. Taking a look at Pokemon Colosseum first, these games keep the backup save system from the GBA games, meaning you have 2 save files in the memory card, and if one gets corrupted, it'll load up the backup save. If both of your saves are dead though, it's over, and you get this screen. One thing that's weird is that you aren't allowed to fix things from within the game. Both Colosseum and XD instruct you to handle things in the GameCube save menu directly. Also odd is that these games both flash the incorrect text on the screen for just a split second whenever both of your saves are corrupted, which looks a bit funky. While trying to break these saves, I also accidentally changed the icon, as you can see. The Colosseum one even animates, which is really wild to see. Next is Battle Revolution. Pokemon Battle Revolution only has one save, and if that's corrupted, this is what you see. The game then gives you this weird text that isn't really a sentence, but is more of a menu option you just can't click on. The other Wii title we're looking at, Pokemon Rumble, starts off a trend you'll see in a couple of games where, instead of telling you to start over, they ask for your permission first before they delete your broken save file, which is a much more gentle way of easing you into the fact that you've lost all your progress. If you refuse to delete it, by the way, the game sends you back to the Wii menu. And if you say yes, as you'd expect, it gives you the option to start over. Not every game has a solution for saves being broken though, as it's highly unlikely, especially for download-only games. Looking at Pokemon Shuffle, that game actually has no proper mechanism for telling the player their save file is broken, so if your save messes up, the game will almost always use it anyways. Here, I intentionally broke the save file by inserting nonsense data into it, and the game now thinks I've played over 300 levels, but also thinks I'm still in the opening tutorial. As I learned though, the game will hit the breaking point if you specifically modify and insert random data into the very start of the save file, which manifests in the game telling you to update? This confused me, but from what I can tell, Pokemon Shuffle assumes any save file that it can't understand is actually a save file from a future version of the game, and assumes you just deleted a patch. This is really weird to see on a game that is fully updated, and is of course no longer getting patched, but that's how that game's handled. Some other games fare even worse when given bad save files. Games like New Pokemon Snap will crash on startup if the save file is corrupted, and give no indication to the player what's wrong. Which sounds bad, but this is such a rare and minute issue that apparently Nintendo didn't find it an issue. These screens are super rare to see on the Switch, because on that console, the save file is stored on the Switch internally, even for cartridge games. So to corrupt your save file, you would have to do something extreme, like unplug your battery mid-save. Nothing we've seen so far, however, compares to what you're about to see next. So yeah, this game gets pretty sad about save corruption. For the record, I recorded this footage on the game's demo from the eShop, so it's possible that this crash doesn't occur on the full game, but it's fun to imagine that it's equally as ridiculous there too. What you may not expect though, is that the original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games do not do this. In fact, none of the previous games act this way when your save file is broken. This is despite the fact, of course, that every game in the series, apart from Deluxe, is on a cartridge, which theoretically could be removed anytime you save. And as we've gone over, it's nearly impossible to corrupt a Switch save without doing it literally intentionally. No other Pokemon game has a screen like this. The closest thing would be the Ranger games, where the second and third entries tell you sorry when your save file is broken and ask you to start over, which are the only other games that acknowledge the emotional depth of your Pokemon save file getting ruined. Let's cap up the spin-offs now. Pokemon Trozei, remember that? Has some sort of save repair system. It's not clear to me if it has a backup save file or what, but whenever I type in a little bit of random nonsense into the save file, it gets back on track and works after just fine. if I add too much nonsense, like a lot, into the save file, it'll give you this screen. Pokemon Dash doesn't do anything complex, so if the save file is broken, it gives you this. And for Detective Pikachu, if any of your save files are broken, it gives you this screen. Interestingly, if you corrupt the save file on the game's demo, and then try to use the game's save transfer feature to bring your save from the demo to the main game, that feature also fails, which would make sense kind of, but also, given that you can only really do this intentionally since it's a digital demo, I imagine just about nobody has ever seen the text box before, which is really cool. Our final 3DS spin-off to cover, Pokemon Rumble Blast, has two different screens for different issues that can arise. In Rumble Blast, your save file, rather than being one big file, is actually a folder with tons of files in them. One file stores your progress for basically the whole game, and everything else is for your different party members. If any of those party member files have issues, the game will actually tell you might have lost some party members. Here, by messing with one party member file, I lost everyone except Victini. If your main file that stores the rest of the data gets corrupted also, the game will tell you it's broken, and ask you if you want to delete it. Kind of like Mystery Dungeon, but less sad. A couple of other spin-offs have no error screen at all, like Pokemon Ranger 1. These games wouldn't crash if your save is broken, they would just act as if it never existed and delete the file, which I found a little weird. Specifically, these games are Pokemon Snap for the N64, Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire, Pokemon Ranger, and Pokemon Art Academy. Going back to the main games, the DS titles all keep things simple. They all look largely the same. You're seeing Platinum right here, but once you've seen one, you've basically seen them all. And aside from a brief wording change in Heart Gold and Soul Silver onwards, that's about the biggest difference between all of these. The 3DS entries get some really neat menu backgrounds that they use for various things, including the error screens, giving us pretty visuals for what was in the past just a blank background with horrifying text. It's also interesting to note here that Ultra Sun and Moon have a slightly different background from Sun and Moon. You ordinarily only see the screen at the very start of the game when you change your language, so it's interesting to note that they are different, and it's the most subtle thing that they could have changed. One other thing to note about all mainline 3DS games is they all lack the backup save feature that was used for every game since Gen 3, and Pokemon Let's Go also drops the feature. This is maybe due to the fact that the 3DS Pokemon games use a really avant-garde, fancy, complicated feature for storing your save file on the cartridge. Specifically, compared to older games of any kind for any console ever, where you have a separate chip for your save file and for your ROM, on Pokemon games in the 3DS, they have them both on one chip. With that change though to having the save and game stored on one chip, they were not able to make the save files very big though, so they only have 1 MB of storage available on the ROM chip, meaning only space for one save file. So those games just drop the feature. Pokemon Let's Go has no excuse though, there's no reason you shouldn't use it. After Let's Go, we of course get the rest of the mainline games on Switch. They're now back to looking terrifying, which is a theme among all Switch error screens. This right here is Shields, and you've seen BDSPs already too earlier in the video. Next, we have the screen used in Legends Arceus, followed by the one for Scarlet and Violet. One thing that's odd among all of these games is that although they bring back the backup save system from previous generations, I wasn't able to get it to work at all. Every time I broke the main save file, the game would just give you the text you see here, and not use the perfectly functional backup save file that it's holding behind the scenes. What's even more odd is that starting in Sword and Shield, these games actually allow you to load the backup save file manually via a title screen button combination. It seems that these backup save files are only used if you manually load them, and the game will refuse to use them if, it needs them for your save being corrupted. It's really strange. This is oddly enough not the first time in the series that the game has acted this way, as Pokemon Ranch on the Wii also seems to do nothing with its backup save from what I could tell. When I broke that game's save file intentionally, it would tell me it couldn't use it, and then crash the Wii, requiring me to hold the power button to turn the console off. The game has a backup save file on Pokemon Ranch, it just doesn't use it when things go wrong, which is really bizarre. Speaking of weird things, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl is really strange here. At the start of the video, I showed you the save corruption screen, but something unique is that the game lets you load the backup save file manually on the title screen before you reach that corruption screen. If you try and do this, the game will actually show you your backup save file with all your data on it and try to load it, but it will essentially crash and give you an infinite loading screen if you try to do this. So if for some reason you can't even load the backup save file, even though it works perfectly fine, I can't understand why it's like this, but that's how the game is handled. Something else unique to BDSP that I left out is that the game is kind of a bit half and half. It will function if your save file is corrupted and give you this screen, but if both save files are corrupted, the backup save file and the main save file, the game will literally crash on startup, giving you an endless black screen, which is really bizarre. Everything about this game is really strange. And with that, we've gone over all the extremely niche, nearly impossible to see normally error screens I could find. I hope you liked the video and the findings of my word research. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and subscribe, all that. However, if you'll stay with me for just a moment more, I have some more fun things to share in this bonus segment. Since I was intentionally breaking every game through hacking and not actually, yanking out my cartridge or my battery, that meant I encountered some really weird experiences along the way. For example, I learned that Pokemon Picross for the 3DS is extremely broken. It's one of those games like Pokemon Shuffle that takes just about anything you type into the save file, even if it's nonsense. Not only that, the game also uses your save file data for the game's restore feature. In Pokemon Picross, if you're doing a Picross puzzle, and then decide you want to pause it and maybe play Smash, I don't know, the game lets you make a temporary save, which then goes into your save file and saves your progress on that puzzle until later on. But since the game is so forgiving with its save data, I learned that by typing nonsense into that thing, the game will think my nonsense is a saved game that I had paused and saved for later, and it'll just load that glitch data as a game state. Here you can see that the visuals are all really wrong and there's multiple puzzles on screen. This is the result of just typing random stuff into the game, and it's really strange. Pokemon Picross is actually a very common and simple way to hack your 3DS by putting a hacked Picross save file on your console. And as you can see here, it's very obvious to understand why thing people do. The game basically has no problem loading anything you give it. Another weird thing, but fun fact, the unreleased and fully complete Pokemon Picross for the Game Boy Color actually handles save files better than the 3DS version, actively looking for save files that are broken and deleting them if they're messed up, which, like every other game ever. Additionally, I learned that Pokemon Battle Trophy, which I kind of forgot existed, is essentially a lower budget version of Pokemon Shuffle and has even less save data protections than Shuffle. Pokemon Battle Trophy will, just like that game, let you type random nonsense into the save file and it'll interpret that data as progress for levels, or Street Pass data, or high scores, just about anything. This leads to the game running fine if you do that. Opening the world map will give you weird holes in your level unlocks, like having one level in a world unlocked but not the ones before it, even though you can only unlock that level normally by doing the ones before it. And on this save file, my game will just crash if I ever open the Street Pass menu, because that's just messed up data. Furthermore, for this game, if you do hack the very, very beginnings of the save file, which was the thing that would break Shuffle, the game will now then just crash on startup, which is crazy. But yeah, that's all I saw and heard while breaking all these games. If you guys have any other games you want to see broken, or are really mad I forgot about Pokepark, let me know your thoughts below. Also check out my streams, I do this all the time. Bye!